I'm back to my same old ways. I swear I try to change, but you just feel so right when I do wrong. So right along.
Welcome everyone to Season 1, Episode 1 of Harder Than Healing. This episode is a clinician, a playwright, and a Green Beret walk into a sound studio. So I am Jason Lemire. I'm the playwright. Over on the couch, who do we have here?
I'm Nathaniel. I'm the clinician.
And I am Donald Malloy, the Green Beret.
All right, gentlemen, welcome. So let's start with the clinician. Nathaniel, can you introduce yourself to our listening audience?
My name is Nathaniel Ellison. I live in the Denver area. I'm in Conifer at 8,000 feet, which is handy because now we are recording at AVN, which is about 9,000 feet up in the hills. I've been in practice for almost 20 years. Went to University of Denver, got a master's in clinical psych, and have a small private practice where I work with folks who are doing transitional issues or students who have ADHD or learning disabilities, kind of help them figure out how to navigate both the classroom and kind of the interpersonal world.
I am the playwright. I'm the founder of Type Theater. Type stands for This Is For Everyone. And I do theater workshops and playwriting workshops and license my play scripts and do commission scripts around the country. I was fortunate enough to be recognized as a Colorado Thespian Educator of the Year. And I am thrilled to be here learning how to do my job better as a storyteller.
And I am Donald Malloy. I am a licensed professional counselor as well as a licensed addiction counselor. Went to the University of Denver, which is where I met Nathaniel. And then after that, did a little bit of clinical work before I went into the military in 2006. Started off in the infantry as an infantry officer, and then went on to Special Forces, where I went to Afghanistan a couple times. Spent 15 months in Iraq when I was an infantry officer. Wrapped it up with another one to Colombia. And so, yeah, my background is in mental health.
And we've got the veteran taste and we've got the clinical side and we got the education side. So Nathaniel, earlier today, you did such a great job of articulating what we're doing here. So how would you describe Harder Than Healing?
I would describe it as an opportunity for us to begin to bridge the gap between different populations. So to begin to have an opportunity to have conversations with veteran population, with the civilian population, with educators, to begin to kind of share the realities of whether it's trauma or suffering or learning or growth, whatever those are, that we have all had in some way a struggle to get to a place where we're more understanding and forgiving of ourselves, and at the same time, something that allows us the opportunity to be connected to the population at large without putting up unnecessary barriers.
You know, for a long time, I've been wanting to do something like this to share with the greater population, you know, the work that, I mean, Nathaniel and I have been talking about this for years, right? And to get somebody like yourself to come on and like pull those stories out of us and have this like collective consciousness no longer, you know, in between our heads and everybody else's, but unspoken.
Right.
And now all of a sudden it's out there, right, for people to come to. To me, that was like the project.
And now I'm showing up and I can be like the front wheel, right?
Yeah, absolutely the front wheel, because you're the one that's steering. We're just on the backside going like, oh yeah, but what about this idea?
Yeah, but like all of like the power and the drive is coming, like it's good. I feel good about my
The power and
position
the
in
drive
this.
wouldn't be there unless you were pulling it out of us.
All right, all right.
That's the piece that I love about it.
Well, and this is the piece that I really enjoy about it is that whether it's project or this endeavor, whatever it is, like there's this melding of three different folks from three different, very, very different worlds who have the opportunity to be able to kind of bridge a bunch of different information. For me, being able to sit down with you and have the stories that Malloy and I have been telling each other for years and kind of going back and forth with, hey, theoretically this is this, or theoretically this could be like that. Having that become something that's more applicable to the real world so that folks can have a shared experience around, oh yeah, that's what that was like for me too. Yeah. So I think for me, that piece of, it seems more like an endeavor than a project. But it fits in with the same stuff that we've been doing forever, right? Like I've been putting together conferences for 12 years. You know, I've help coordinate a mentoring program that from its initial instances was like 6 schools with, David Flink, who's the head guy now at Eye to Eye, was like, we used to stay up and watch Jon Stewart and, discuss education reform, right? Which tells you how long that conversation has been going on, because Jon Stewart has been, well, he's back on the air now, but we were doing when he was still doing The Daily Show. So this idea of being able to do something that you can facilitate change on a greater level has always been something that's been a piece of what it is I think we both wanted to do.
And then, Malloy, like, you do a lot of work in the healing space. And can you share just a little bit about how Nathaniel, being a clinician, and you yourself being a clinician but with a very unique background, can you just share a little bit about how you ended up sitting there on the couch?
Well, because it's interesting, right? So I was thinking about this earlier, and I don't really know where I would start my story, right? So, I was a kid who got out of grad school and really kind of knew what I wanted to do and also didn't have any idea, right? And so I ended up doing a whole bunch of random stuff before I got to grad school. Went to law school for a little while, was coaching college baseball, all those kinds of things. But my real intention was to help adolescents, right? And I wanted to help adolescents because I was a kid who, suffered from I was an idiot. I just felt like the dumbest guy on the planet. And it was tough to navigate that space because I knew I was smart, but I also knew I was not the guy who belonged in school, right? And so trying to help out all these adolescents, and then, oh, by the way, decided that law school wasn't my thing. So I ended up in grad school over at University of Denver, which is where I met Nathaniel, and studied forensic psychology there. And all of a sudden, this like other door started to open, and I started to recognize that, maybe I'd also missed that idea of like I was pretty smart. I just had to apply it in the right places. And so I'm talking with this guy Nathaniel, and I'm like, hey, wow, this guy has a lot of similar views, right? And oh, by the way, maybe feels like or has felt like I feel, struggling with school at some point and that kind of stuff. And the next thing you know, we have these conversations, and I describe it all the time as, in my mind, you don't want to be in my mind. My mind is 6 tornadoes going on at any one time, and each one of those are a conversation. If you get too close, you get sucked into that conversation. Mm-hmm. And so Nathaniel and I, we get sucked into those tornadoes pretty frequently, and that became why I wanted to sit on this couch, because with our dialogue, the things that we've experienced over time, and this is why I love this. I am going to grow to love this because we can tackle trauma, right? We can tackle learning disorders. We can tackle race, religion, like all those things. I told my director at one point that I had a group and that's what we were talking about. And she's like, you did what? And I was like, yeah, that's what we did. And it was fun. And it was fine. And so for me, it becomes the project of how do I connect everybody?
Yeah.
Because like you said, I have a very different story. I didn't join the military until I was 30. And then when I joined the military, it was after a master's degree in forensic psychology. So people ask me all the time, like, why'd you do that? I was like, well, because I ran out of time, right? Like if you don't join by the age of 30, you're screwed. You can't join. So I joined at the age of 30, and in my training at that point was mental health professional.
Mm-hmm. The forensic side.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden now I'm going through basic training as a 30-year-old. And
now, how are all those like 19-year-olds looking at you?
Well, and it's hysterical, right? Because
like going to grad school for the first time.
Well, it was hysterical for me because I was thinking like, okay, like this is going to be like, I'm the coach, right? Like I was a coach at Metro State actually in 2004, 2005, and then 5 and 6, I believe. And that was right before I went into the military. So this was kind of like the same thing. I mean, actually those guys were a little bit older, right? So now I'm in basic training with guys that are 18, 19, and 20. I'm not coach at that point, but I definitely fell into that role pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And then I found myself recognizing that mental health. So, and I'm writing a book right now, and the book started off literally at that point where I was, hey, I'm going to write my daughter, a letter. And that became a journal is what it became. And so starting from back then, it was, how do I communicate to my daughter, I don't know, the trials and tribulations of life while I'm sitting in boot camp, trying to discover them for myself, right?
So I think what's interesting in terms of something that we all have in common, we all have this coach in us. Nathaniel, you're an academic coach. Have you done any athletic coaching?
I wouldn't qualify it as coaching. I was a martial arts instructor when I was younger.
No, wait a minute. You're sleeping on that U6 soccer team that you had.
That is true. That is true. We did have a preschool. So my kiddos were in preschool, and everyone wanted to have, your kids bond for the first time. And so it's like, let's get all the boys together and have them play soccer.
And I can only assume, knowing what I know about youth soccer, it went completely smooth, and everybody totally got along, and all the parents.
It was flawless.
Okay,
I think
perfect.
The reality of it was, like, I know nothing about soccer, so my soccer acumen kind of, mirrored what it was that the children were doing, running around on the field. We were all over the place. You have an ADHD coach who's never coached soccer before. I'm like, yeah, I know kids. I can do kids, but
Absolutely.
Like, what are we gonna do as far as like drills and those types of things are concerned? I'm like, look, guys, just go out there, have fun, chase the ball around.
So like we've got
leadership still though,
right?
But
have
that's the
fun
part
with
that counts.
Yeah,
right.
Well,
we have this impulse to do the leadership thing.
Well, I think it's not only the impulse to do it. It's like for me at least, I can only wait so long for somebody to fill that void.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's this space
Oh,
where
that's interesting.
Where this is not my idea. Like, sure, it sounds like a great idea for my kiddo to be playing soccer. Whatever, that's going to be great. Who's going to coach? And then it's just crickets.
Yeah.
Right. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, I'll do it. They're like, do you know soccer? I'm like, absolutely not. I know nothing about soccer. How are you going to coach? Well, there's 6. So I'm pretty sure if, we have some paint and draw some lines and put some arrows, like it can be, you follow that arrow, you follow that arrow. The goal is to get the ball into the goal. So let's just do that. But yeah, so I guess in that way, I was definitely a coach. I think for me, it goes more to that adolescent piece though. Right, because I picked that up because we needed a coach, and my kid was on the team, and nobody was doing anything. So for me, that was filling the void, I think, in some ways. And ironically enough, it did end up being like we had a pretty good time. Our team was pretty good. So.
It is funny because, oh, by the way, I coached my son's soccer team, and why did I do it? Same exact reason. They didn't have coaches, and so they're like, "Hey, guy, do you want to coach?" And I was like, "Well, coach college baseball, but that's not going to do me any good coaching soccer." But at the same extent, it's leadership, right? And so that's what I found. And it was funny because, I don't think they started off so good, and I didn't start off coaching them so good. But then after a while, it was more like, hey, guys, talk to each other. Hey, guys, push these guys forward, push those guys back. I'm not making up the rules here, but I'm just, trying to herd cats, so to speak. And the next thing you know, they start to get it, right? And then they start to just gel. And once they start to gel, then all of a sudden you're like, hey, wow, they're kind of good, And it's like, I know nothing about soccer, but it's a leadership role. And like you said, the void, it's just you pick up where somebody else isn't going to be. And it's not like I think I gravitate towards that, right? Like I know how to follow, and I don't mind following. But all too often, somebody else doesn't want to lead. Okay.
Or somebody else is doing it in a way that doesn't fit for me. So, I mean, when I started doing my conference originally, part of the reason I started doing it was because the format was at this location that used to be a brewery. So you're hosting a conference for folks with ADHD and learning disabilities, and it's in a space that's difficult to navigate, that doesn't have any clarity around like access for ADA stuff. Like
and dude, it looks like a level of Super Mario Brothers. Like you're
really
looking
does.
around, you can just spend 10 minutes following the pipes like, ooh.
Yeah, in the Tivoli. And
Yeah.
So you got ADHD people wandering around this building trying to figure out where they're supposed to be going for their next session. And next thing you know, they're outside in front of the water fountain. Yeah. I mean, that's,
Okay,
that's
so
like
so for you,
101.
it's coming from this impulse of Nathaniel because Nathaniel's got ADHD, right? Nathaniel's like, I know what my people need, if you will. And so I guess one of the things I'm wondering is that, Malloy, similarly, the work that you then do with veterans, I have to imagine that a huge asset for you is not only do you have this clinical background, but there's a lot that's got to be very familiar with the stories they're telling you.
Yeah, well, and honestly, it's like kind of hard at times, right? Because they'll start to tell a story, and you can't help but like think about your past and how it resonates with you. And so, so I've had a fair amount of, I don't consider myself reactive to it, but I've had a fair amount of trauma in the military. And when I sense that somebody else is going through something, I feel like I'm like, yep, I can see it, right? I can see it because I experienced that. Yeah, absolutely. And it's this idea of like, okay, I don't know exactly where you're at, but I have a pretty good idea as to where I was at when I felt that way. And, these are conversations that I've had over the years that somebody can say, hey, I can help you and tell you things. Somebody else can say like, hey, I can maybe the throwing the meds at you or throwing something at you in some way, shape, or form. But with this experience of being a veteran, whether it be, the myriad of things that can happen to you when you're in combat, I have learned by experience that it's easier to crawl into the hole with that person and start crawling out. Right. And it's funny because in the back of my mind, I have this like idea of like this person's kind of looking at me and I'm crawling my way out and they're like, hey, dude, no, you got to stay here. Like, we got to stay here. I'm like, no, if we stay here, we don't live. Right. So let's start crawling out. And they're like, well, don't leave me. And it's like, no, if I get up there, you can watch me get up there. Right. I can come right back because I know how to get up there. Right. So even if you're stuck, that's fine. I get that because I was there too. But see,
here's what's interesting is that in that metaphor, you're not carrying the person out of the hole.
Can't do it.
Right. Okay.
I refuse to do it.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like there's this piece where there's this impulse of going back to the Super Mario Brothers, right? I was sitting in the keynote presentation, stadium seating. Everybody who's there is there for an ADHD conference. So you have a room of 150 people who are operating underneath this premise that we're supposed to sit still in these stadium chairs and listen to this keynote person. Now, granted, not the best keynote I've ever heard. So we'll just put that on the side. I'm a guy who's sitting in the very middle of the front row. We get about 10 minutes in and I'm like,
this is a bad place.
I can't. Nope.
That's what I've. Nathaniel, you have a handful of like head movements. If you're just listening, you can't see this, but it's sort of like a Stevie Wonder kind of like that is the Nathaniel. Nope. Oh my goodness.
Can't do it. Yeah. Can't do it. And so there's a second level. So we're standing and we're seated, stadium seating. I go up to the balcony above and I look down and it's like a wave. Right? Because you got 150 people sitting listening to an unengaging keynote, and every single one of us is just
very
like,
uncomfortable.
Cross your legs, uncross your legs. You're like, like pulling your shirt down, like anything you can do to like activate your brain in a way that's going to keep you engaged. But the expectation is like, sit here, listen to this keynote for 2 hours about ADHD. Now, whoever was in charge of putting that together clearly did not know their audience. Yeah.
And had the best intentions, right? That's absolutely the interesting conflict, is that they did all the legwork. They 100%. Clearly care.
Right.
And there's that gap of, I don't want to say empathy, but there's this sort of gap in the ability to put yourself in the shoes of the person.
I think empathy works. I mean, I think experientially, if you've never been in a space where you felt compelled to move and you didn't know why, like if you were the person who was able to sit and study and, movement was not something that was a piece of that experience, or you were the student who was able to sit in, the front of the classroom and didn't get distracted by every sound that was going on, not only in your classroom, but in the building, right? Like you're listening to the movie that they're playing in the English class across the hall and your teacher's like, what are you doing, Nathaniel? I'm like,
I know what they're doing over there, though, right?
I'm doing 10 things, dude. Right. That's what I'm doing.
Right. What's the question again? Okay. Yeah. Right. And so then you, if you've never been in that space, it's a very difficult space to understand.
Sorry. So let me ask you this, right? I am here primarily because I founded this theater education company, Type Theater, acronym for This is for Everyone.
Right.
That's my goal.
Right.
I want to make theater feel inspiring and accessible for everybody.
Right.
I was a super socially awkward kid growing up. I did zero theater until between my junior and senior year of high school. I did the governor's school for the arts, and I went as a creative writing scholarship that they had. It was incredible. They had like the top 50 orchestral musicians and the top 15 dancers, and by top I mean the kids who filled out the paperwork and applied and whatever.
Right. Or parents did it for them.
Exactly. Right. But I'm there, and it's a much longer story. I can tell it later, but basically I end up being the writer for a bunch of the theater kids and the dance kids, and they dragged me on stage, and I was like, wow, this is all right. And slowly over the course of my senior year and then into college, I got to like myself a heck of a lot more because of who theater gave me permission to be and the qualities that theater gave me permission to flex. Right.
I love this.
And so I'm glad you love this. Thank you, brother.
That is fantastic.
And so for me, theater, again, my kids are natural performers.
Yeah.
Right.
That is
I
true.
look at them. My son Zev is a gotta dance kid. Right. My son Esben is just totally comfortable being super intense on stage. I was never that. And so when I became a theater teacher, my intention was to create programming that was accessible for everybody, regardless of your introvert, whether you're a kiddo with special needs or you're a wonderful kiddo who also has Down syndrome. I want to make sure that theater is for everyone. And so now I go to these conferences around the country.
I think so. One of the things for you too, though, is like not only is it for everyone, but it's accessible.
Yep.
Right. And in the way that one of the things I've always really enjoyed about the way that you teach is that your messaging is not only the theater piece of it, but there's also the cultural component, and there's the spiritual component, and there's the the historical component around it. So it I think gives you a medium that allows students to access it who may not necessarily be in that kind of like traditional let's sit in the classroom space. And that's what I've always, I mean, that's one of the
just
things I've
for
always loved.
frame of reference, I got to teach Nathaniel's kids for a
Yes.
bunch of years,
Yes.
which was wonderful.
Terribly entertaining.
And well, thank you, brother.
Absolutely.
I think ultimately where I'm going with this is that when I go to conferences and I'll do a workshop and I'll have like, the energy is incredible. I'll be in a room that's meant for 75 people and I'll have 150 teenagers in there who are there to do theater. And I ask them, what are the plays that you wish your school was doing? And what are the stories that you want to see told? And then the scripts you see just are not telling those stories well enough. And every single time they're not doing a good enough job discussing mental health. They're not doing a good enough job exploring neurodiversity. They're not doing a good enough job digging into trauma, depression, substance abuse, which is not to say that there aren't plays out there, but from the perspective of these 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, they're not speaking to them.
Well, and that's the important piece, right? From the perspective of that person. Right. So whether that's your vet or whether that's a college student who comes in with ADHD and you're having this conversation with them about what is it like for you to be in a classroom, and they start telling you, well, it's really hard for me to sit still. And I'm like, yeah. Like, so what do I do? I'm like, well, then don't sit still.
Word. And you're probably the first.
And there's the permission.
You're probably the first adult who ever said that to me.
Right. And then I'll get that from students where they're like, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm like, well, you go to the professor and you say, hey, Mr. Professor, I really enjoy the content of your class. I really want to be engaged. And after about 15 minutes, I'm going to be watching the squirrels outside. So I'm going to probably end up getting up, maybe walking around in the back of the class. I mean, I might dive out and give myself a glass of water so that I can still stay engaged. So I just want you to know this is a part of what it is that I do to stay engaged. But you have to know that that's what you're doing, because otherwise it's the random quirky kid in the back of the class.
Well, and sometimes you have to know that when you're going to say that, that teacher's also not going to receive that very well, but you're still giving yourself permission to do that anyway. Right. And so like going back to what you were saying about the, to love yourself and that kind of thing and giving permission to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I love doing that with my veterans. And honestly, I get like a weird rap about it because I create this kind of model for veterans to work with when they're processing trauma. And one of the biggest pieces of it is coping skills. Right. And it's like, hey, we can talk about trauma all day, but how about we start with coping skills first? Right. Because if we start talking about trauma, the next thing you know, this person is in a bad place. And I haven't given them anything to help themselves so that they don't fly off the handle when they're going through trauma. So we do that first. And part of it is saying like, hey, might want to get in front of the mirror and say, I love you every once in a while. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, okay. And I've talked to guys that have been with me for 3 and 4 and 5 years. And they're like, that is still the toughest part of anything you've ever asked me to do is to get in front of the mirror and say, I love you. Right. And it's fun for me because I'm like, okay, so I know everything else that's going on in terms of the trauma piece. I said, I love you to myself in the mirror, like back when my father is passing. And I'm like, okay, a fire has to be lit. I have to get going. I have to do these things. ADHD, learning disorder doesn't matter anymore. I have to put those things to the side and no longer be a victim.
Right. There you go.
Now I have to take charge of me, right? And then just move forward. And it was like this pivotal point. And it's funny because I can see it when I'm working with different veterans where they're just like, okay, you just gave me some tools, right? And I don't know how to use them just yet. But as soon as I put them into practice, then you're telling me we can start working on trauma? It's like, absolutely. They will tell me then when they're ready to start. Right? Because then they can tell you, hey, I feel comfortable now, right? I feel these things. And you're talking about going up on stage with these people. And I'm thinking like, yeah, that's when I get these veterans to get off of the couch, get out of the house, middle finger isolation and say like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take advantage of this rec therapy or this, whether it's a bowling or golf or yoga, you name it. They get out of the house and they do this thing. And while they're doing this thing, they also connect with other veterans. And so the next thing you know, they're like, okay, so now I have this like breathing exercise and this yoga move or whatever else. So that's a tool. But the other tool is this support network that I'm building. Right.
And that's the connection piece.
And then they become accountable to themselves as well as everybody else.
And I feel like what I hear you saying is that when you talk about the word victim, I don't hear you negating the shit that happened because the shit has happened. The distinction I hear you making is between a victim of it and a survivor of it.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, right? Because I love telling my veterans this too. Like, I'm not telling you not to be emotional. As a matter of fact, I want you to be emotional. Right. And when you are, it's also okay to compartmentalize that at times so that you could get through a day. Right. Like, hey, I just feel like shit. Like I'm sad about this, or I'm depressed about this, or I'm super anxious about this. Okay, well, do we want to focus on that now? Right? Because we don't have to. Like we have times like in yoga, at the gym, sitting with a loved one, coming to see me, right? There's all kinds of time that we've carved out for that. So I want you to focus on that. But it's like your kids, right? If your kid is coming to talk to you and you're like, hey, I'm working right now, you want to tell them like, can you wait until I'm off work so that I can give you my utmost attention?
Right.
But we don't do that with emotions.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. Instead, we want to like scapegoat the emotion and say like, I blame you for all of these things that you're doing to me. And I'm thinking like that. No, the emotion's beautiful, right? It's a part of our brain. You can't get rid of it. So why not learn the capacity of loving that part of our brain that knows how to feel, right? But instead, we like to compartmentalize it. And then unfortunately, we don't go back to it, right? And I feel like that's the part that...
So the compartmentalizing is okay.
100%.
But it's the leaving it alone in the cage forever, that then becomes the problem.
Well, yeah, it's the brain's going to do it for you whether you want to or not.
Yep.
Right? I mean, that's what we see in trauma is when people are like, hey, buddy, are you okay? And they're not there.
Yep.
Right? That's compartmentalizing, right? So their brain decided to go offline. And the only way to get that back online is to intentionally work towards it, right? So the brain's got its own design. It's going to do what it's going to do. I like to call it the trickster at times. Learned that from another veteran. And it's going to trick you into putting that, you know, you have trauma, you put it into a box and you put it on the shelf and you're like, I'll come back for you. And then years later, there's the box with dust and you never gotten back to it. Well, that's because you didn't create the intention, right? Now, is it appropriate to put the box on the shelf? 100%. But if you come back to it years later, I think that's your fault. I think it's your responsibility to go back to it.
Here's the piece where I think it gets messy, because sometimes somebody told you to put those things in that box and put it on that shelf, right? And so the expectation, the experience has been, I'm not allowed to be that that person, right? Like I'm not allowed to be. This is the expectation of what it looks like to be a successful student, right? And they put that piece of like, if you would just focus or apply yourself, or if you could just
that one,
right? Like that's one of my favorite ones.
Yeah,
I say this all the time. Like if I could focus, I could fly.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
I can't do either of those things. So let's just make that fact. Right. And so I think a lot of times we get put into this space where you're right, that trauma does get put on the shelf, but it got put on the shelf by my first grade Catholic school teacher who would yell at me because of the little cave desk and I couldn't find anything in there. Right? You know, you remember those desks?
Yeah.
The ones like that you could put your papers in, and there are the organized children who have an organized cave desk.
Yeah. They're murderers.
They're not me.
Those are the people who are not normal.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
But for me,
They're
it was
quirky.
right. Like just kidding. That's the box that got put on that shelf, was that first grade teacher who was like, you need to clean out your desk. And I was like, that sounds like an excellent idea. And theoretically, that would be very useful. However, I know that there's a pencil in the back right-hand corner of this desk, because that's always where I put my pencil. Because that's what I was always getting yelled at for. It's like, how come you can't find a pencil? I was like, okay, fine. There will always be a pencil in the back right-hand corner of this desk. And everything else could be like crumpled up papers. There's a math book in there. There's crayons. There's gum. There's toys. I mean, there's all kinds of crap in that desk. But whenever it was like, Nathaniel, do you have your pencil? I was always like, sure do. Yep, right here.
And so this idea of the thing that you get told to box up. I think one of the things that I hear you pointing out is that it really makes a big difference who's doing the boxing, right?
It does.
If you're doing the boxing for yourself and you're like, you know what? I'm going to box this up for 3 hours and 20 minutes.
Right.
Great. You're in control of that process. But when you're doing it because the first grade teacher is making you do it, or your parents are making you do it, or your culture is making you do it, or your society is making you do it.
Right.
Because I think you're right. When we take something, we box it up and we leave it alone and it festers.
Well, this is beautiful because this is the veteran story, right?
Word.
Like this is like, so, I mean, and we can talk about childhood trauma too, because I'm sure if you're either being abused or neglected, your caregivers are telling you like, shut the valve off, right? Put that wherever you want to, shelf or not. You're not going to be emotional right now. That makes me feel uncomfortable. But you start talking.
That's the important part, though. Like that makes them feel uncomfortable.
Right. Exactly. So the other person feels uncomfortable, tells you shut it off.
Right.
There goes the box on the shelf. Right. And then you're like, well, I would open it up, but then they would have to give me permission to open it up.
Or that would make them uncomfortable. So
and also that box is you. That's the thing.
100%.
The box is not you.
It becomes it's your story.
But then there's that piece of you that is, it's not getting its vitamin D. It's malnourished. It's unshaved. It's a mess. It's growing
We're
polyps
not taking
and
care of it.
Exactly. And so I'm picturing like oh my God, you remember Harvey Dent, Two-Face in Batman, right?
Yeah.
Where there's just that side of you that is.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect piece too, right? Because there are two sides to it. And someone told you to put that box on the shelf and you put it there. And then they also said, okay, now that we have taken care of this issue of you not being able to sit still, we're going to give you this other thing that we expect you to do. Now we want you to focus on the front of the room. So you learn that in order for you to be successful theoretically in class, your job, now that you've put your little quirkiness and the little like moving around happy kid on the shelf, is to sit still and focus on the teacher. Now, I'll tell you this honestly. I can look you dead in the face and have absolutely no idea what you're talking about.
100%.
But that's a skill you both cultivated because you were asked to.
Right. And that's something that was expected. And so
Right.
like when the teacher, professor, insert whatever other professional person here is giving you directions or telling you these things that you're supposed to be doing, I might get 20% of that.
Yeah.
And then once we're done with you telling me how I'm supposed to work and how my brain is supposed to function, I think to myself, like, I really missed the majority of what I was supposed to get out of that conversation.
Yep.
And now I need to go back and figure out how to learn it again.
All right, so check this out. Here's what's great, right? Is that we've gotten these little pieces of the three of us.
That is true.
And so what I want to ask is just sort of rapid fire, perfect world. First episode. It's the first episode of our podcast. Our podcast, it is. So our show is called, our project, our endeavor is called Harder Than Healing.
Mm-hmm.
And we have run the gambit on the healing that we know people need. Childhood trauma, battlefield trauma, trauma of being asked to be something that we're not, the trauma of being asked to box up a vital piece of ourselves. And so I guess I would ask you guys, perfect world, right? So for me, my perfect world about who this show reaches is I want to have those 15, 16, 17 college age kids listening to this and saying, okay, there are some folks who are taking an interest in the issues that are and experiences that are authentic and important to me. And they're going to hear some coping skills and some solutions from us. And then my role as a playwright is ultimately I'm going to look to craft these authentic plays that these students can then take and run with based on everything I learned from y'all and from our guests. Mm-hmm. So that's my blue sky vision for ultimately where this goes. I would love to hear from you guys. Who's your perfect audience and what would you like them to get from this show?
You want to go first?
Sure. I don't know that there is a perfect audience as much as the folks who hear this and connect with the reality of I've always felt like I was a little different and wasn't comfortable with that. I think the folks that I would like to get connected with this are the folks who've had this experience of like, I know that I'm supposed to be doing something in a certain way, but it doesn't work for me like that, right? Whether that's a adolescent kid, whether that's, an older person. I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until I was in grad school. And so for me, it was that moment of understanding like, oh, I'm different, but I'm not like crazy or weird or, broken, right? You'll hear that a lot of times, right? And I think for me, it's that person who's having that experience of like, if I could only sit down and read, right? Like, well, if you have dyslexia and you read at a 4th grade level as an adult, that's not really a thing, right? Like I want people to be able to connect with the realities of the way that they work in a way that is honest and authentic so that you're not trying to like make yourself into something that you're not.
And what's in your experience, both personal and clinical, what's the benefit of being authentic like that?
It's really entertaining. I mean, personally, it's a lot easier, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think on the one side, it's very difficult to try and fit yourself into that box that they put on the shelf because, I mean, I'm not that guy who fits into that box. And my ability to be able to connect with folks is something that's always been pretty easy for me. However, when that happens in my little ADHD brain and I'm supposed to be doing something over here or supposed to be focused on this thing and I get distracted, it's difficult for me to be able to like stay in that moment. Like right now, I'm like, I don't even know how to answer this question in the perfect world. Like, who do I want to reach? I don't know. Like me, I guess,
Yeah, but see, what's funny is I heard everything you said, and I know exactly who you're looking to reach. I think that's one of the things that's interesting about the podcast format is that ultimately we're listening to each other think.
Yeah, that's true.
And the audience is listening to us think. And so I would just say the audience member that I'm picturing is someone who needs to know they're not defective.
Right. And also that there are other folks out there who have struggled with it, and that the more authentic you can be with yourself around whether it's you're learning or, in air quotes, learning disability, learning difference, whatever that looks like, your brain is wired the way that it's wired.
Yeah.
So learn how to use it and learn how to use it efficiently.
See, and it's fun because as he says that, my son and I talk about this all the time. It's his superpower, right? To recognize that he has a brain that will work a little bit differently than others, right? And so to go into the question is like the people I want to reach. So my sister was in the Las Vegas massacre. Right? She was in the crowd when that guy was shooting out of the hotel there in Las Vegas.
Wow.
And I remember her talking to me afterwards, and it was funny because we're trying to talk lightly about it, and I was like, "Hey, that's a lot," and she's like, "It was a lot," and I was like, "No, that was like, whew, that's huge, that's crazy." And all of a sudden she starts to relax a little bit, and then she got emotional, and she said that so she went to this ballroom where they were gathering people from that massacre were gathering so that they could offer support to each other. And she said she walked in and all of a sudden she felt so much better, right? Like she belonged.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, welcome to the project, right? Welcome to what I love to do. When I bring veterans in to this mold that I've tried to create, I like to tell them, you don't need me, right? Or you don't need the individual counselor all the time. What you do need is a support network, right? You do need to know that there's other people out there that they don't have to have suffered the same thing. And I think that's the part that I really try and hit home with on this is that trauma is trauma is trauma is trauma. Doesn't matter what your trauma is. Some people like to say that their trauma is something and then they exclude themselves from certain groups, right? Like, well, I won't get along with them because they're military, or I won't get along with them because they don't have the same trauma. And it's just not true, right? All the symptoms are the same. That's one of the reasons why, and I'm not saying I'm a fan of the DSM, but that's one of the reasons why it's in the DSM and it has specifics to it, right? Because if you have trauma, this is how it comes out. Your nervous system goes offline. You feel numb. You feel confused. You can't manage a lot of your emotions. You can't manage a lot of what you do. And until you take some sort of accountability to say like, okay, well, I can put myself back in a place where I can feel again, right? Like the emotion that I felt was so intense that I don't want to feel. I can control that though. And I just need to be able to feel that. And usually it takes connection with other human beings that potentially have either gone through it or were courageous enough to tell their story and whatever else. So the next thing you know, the connection, right? And I like to reference the Rat Park all the time because this is it, right? This is the idea of getting people together to recognize that your trauma doesn't have to be identical to the next person, for you to know that so long as you connect with another human being, right, that you're a human being, that you can feel, you can adjust, you can move forward. And that hole that we're talking about, you don't have to be in it. Right. And some people would probably climb out and look around and be like, screw that, I'm going back. Right. I'm going to jump right back down this hole.
Well, and that's what happens if you climb out of the hole and there's no one there for you. So
Exactly.
I feel like we want to build a community here where we're here for you.
Right. And I think a piece of it too is as we talk about it, and this is 100% my processing speed because I'm like, after you asked me, should I go first? It's like, I should have gone second. The piece of in that perfect world is I want to connect people who have these diverse backgrounds in a way that they can understand that whether it's trauma or suffering is a shared experience. And, between the veteran population or the civilian population, that if you've experienced loss, you've experienced loss. And that's something that we can all agree on. And whether that's, in combat or whether that's through you lost someone to suicide or you lost someone in your family due to addiction or whatever that looks like, there's there's a bridge between those experiences. And
Right.
when we silo ourselves and put ourselves in those individual boxes of like, I can only talk about my ADHD and how hard it was for me to, function in grad school, but I can't talk to this person who's struggled with this other thing because they don't have ADHD, right? Well, maybe, but you're excluding yourself from a huge possibility of different interactions in the world. And if you saw Malloy and I together and didn't know that we were as connected as we are, and he was dressed in, BDUs and I'm, getting ready to go do some random clinical interview in a suit and a tie, like nobody's gonna be like, oh, these guys are gonna connect.
Right. You should, probably the furthest from that.
Right. And that's the piece. Like we're bringing something together that I think allows both populations, whether that's veterans or civilians, and the opportunity to be able to connect on a baseline level. Like we've all experienced difficult things, and it's a wonderful space to be able to connect with people across the board.
And I think that the piece that I would add to that is that so many people want to connect and don't know how to connect.
Right.
Or want to connect, don't know how to connect, and are almost even scared of connection even when they do start to connect.
Well, that's definitely true.
Right. And so I think this is a part of that too, because I was that guy. I'm like an introverted introvert. And I'm always out in the community and people are like, you can't be an introvert. I'm like, oh yeah. Because when I leave here, I'm going home and I don't want to be around people anymore. But this idea of us doing this is that idea of saying, this is your community, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you want to stay indoors and or in your car and listen to this thing, which I hope everybody does, then you're part of the community, right? But while that grows, you also recognize, okay, so there's some value, right? Whether or not I feel comfortable isolating, there's some value in practicing. And I'll say it like I tell my veterans, like you need to practice being you. And you don't get to practice being you by yourself in isolation, in your home or your car, those kinds of things. You can, but you don't ever get that feedback of like, that doesn't make sense or that doesn't make sense. And tell me more about that, because you need to develop that thought. You need to develop that personality. You need to develop you. And you don't get the opportunity to do that unless you practice being you. That's the art of getting out of isolation.
And so I think what's very interesting to me, and I feel like this is how we can close episode 1, is we kicked around titles for this show for a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. And we ultimately settled on Harder Than Healing. And I'm thinking about that veteran who did all sorts of healing practices with you, went to yoga. Sure, I'll go to yoga. Did meditation. Yeah, I'll do meditation. Saw the clinicians, did everything. Dude, look yourself in the mirror and say, I love you.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that sometimes is the hardest part.
Mm-hmm.
And so the healing is like we're going to suture this. We're going to put the Band-Aid on. I'm going to do my meditation. I'm going to bring my heart rate down. But sometimes the hardest part is looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I love you.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to add one more piece, but I'm going to.
Do it.
No.
It's like this check in the box thing, right? Like you can't just check the box, right?
Word.
So people can get into these things and check the box. And were you there? Yeah, I showed up.
Yeah, I healed.
Did you do this thing? Yeah, I did it.
Yeah, look, I healed. I checked the boxes.
I went and I breathed and I did yoga and I did all those things. Did you go to bowling? Yeah, I went there. Did you hang out with these people? I did. Okay. Did you go and you look yourself in the mirror and say, I still got some work to do? Right. And just because I have work to do doesn't mean I can't love myself. And it goes back to that permission thing. I'm going to give myself permission to really sink my teeth into this thing.
Word.
Right. And to say, I love you and practice that.
Yeah.
Right. And stay focused and intentional on it.
That's the piece for me too, is how do you make sure that you give yourself the opportunity to be able to learn how you learn. Right. It's that piece of becoming connected and being social. It's the freedom to be able to understand, like, look, I know that what you are about to do is not going to work for me. And so here's what I'm going to do. And I think in order to do that, you have to know first what works for you.
And you have to believe you're worth the investment.
Right.
Because a lot of times you get boxed up and you're like, well, shit, they're boxing me up. I must not be worth investing myself.
Right. Like if I'm in that box of like this dyslexic kid, clearly I'm not going to become a writer.
All right. So this has been episode 1 of Harder Than Healing. Thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to the season. The format is going to be the three of us talking shop on a particular topic. That topic could involve neurodiversity, so we could be getting into dyslexia or ADHD. The topic could be one around mental health, so we're going to be grappling with trauma, anxiety, substance abuse. And after the three of us grapple with it a bit, what we'll then do is bring in a guest who's got a unique lens or perspective on that topic. We will learn from them, pepper them with questions, find out everything that we can from them, and then have a sort of debrief on the end and reflect on what we learned from our guest. Sending all kinds of love out there to our listeners from Harder Than Healing. Really excited for you guys to throw comments in. Please be in touch with us. I know a lot of you have stories to tell, and later on in the season, we're going to be addressing and answering a lot of the questions that you all ask. So really remember, this is like a two-way street. We want this to be a community for you too. So with that, I want to say thank you, and catch you next episode.
Hi, my name is Watika Ling, and I'm the CEO of Warrior Now. And I want to thank you for listening to Harder Than Healing, produced in partnership with All Points North and Warrior Now. This podcast is recorded on the APN campus in Edwards, Colorado. Warrior Now is a nonprofit organization that provides veterans a whole health approach through peer-to-peer services. For more information, you can contact us at info@warriornow.org or pod@harderthanhealing.com. You can also find us on all social media platforms at Warrior Now. Like, share, or subscribe for new episodes. Thank you.